Good evening. My name is Dave. Thank you for joining our live interactive telephone town hall. We're hosting tonight's event to give Congresswoman Spanberger the opportunity to hear directly from you and answer your questions about the issues facing Virginia's families and economy. As I mentioned, this event is an interactive forum. Congresswoman Spanberger will be taking as many questions as she possibly can during this event. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your phone keypad at any time, and you will be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff. They will take down your name and where you're calling from. The next time you hear your name, you will be live on the call, and you will be able to ask your question directly. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal below on our online streaming player at spanberger.house.gov. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. If you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and you wish to ask the Congresswoman a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. Additionally, if you would like to receive updates from our office via email, please press *6 on your phone keypad at any time, and an operator will collect your email address. We could receive a lot of questions during this event, so if we're not able to address your question, please call our district office at 804-401-4110 during normal business hours. Again, if you have any questions throughout the event, please press *3 on your keypad or type them below the streaming player. Now, please welcome Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger.
Hello, everyone. I'm Abigail Spanberger, and I look forward to hearing from you as we talk about the issues facing you, your businesses, our communities, and our country. But before I begin, I want to address the major news of this week, the draft opinion related to Roe versus Wade, and the potential that our country and the Supreme Court intends to overturn it. I am deeply concerned about the possibility of this ruling, this leaked opinion, becoming a reality. It represents a loss of a constitutional right. It represents a movement backwards for a right that's been in place for 2 generations. And it represents a threat to our constitutional right to privacy. Throughout the pages of this draft ruling, Justice Alito, part by part, stages an all-out assault on the right to privacy and all that it protects, abortion rights and other rights that have been decided based on this principle. I've heard from many Virginians who are concerned about what this would mean, what happens when the Supreme Court announces its final decision, what it means for the girl who's been raped and who is now forced to endure a government-mandated pregnancy of her rapist, what it means for the mother who is pregnant again, but this time it's an ectopic pregnancy that threatens her life and threatens to leave her children motherless if she's forced to undergo a government-mandated pregnancy. These are the things that are on my mind, and these are the calls that I'm fielding from people throughout our district who are deeply concerned. It's a complex issue. It's an emotional issue. But foundationally, we are looking at movement backwards about the reversal of rights that have existed for 2 generations, and potentially an upheaval of every decision based on the constitutional principle of a right to privacy. So I look forward to answering your questions, to further discussing this or other topics. Before we open up the phones, I do want to remind everyone that you can always reach out to my office to provide us with your opinions and your ideas. My office number is 804-401-4110. You can also submit a letter. You can also submit your opinions on our website at spanberger.house.gov. Before we get to questions, I do want to give an update on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which I was proud to help negotiate and ultimately get across the finish line and celebrate as the president signed it into law. Last month, I was proud to announce an additional $165 million for Virginia to expand transportation options, reduce travel times, and decrease congestion on our highways, like I-95. This investment is made possible thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, and I am excited to see the benefits here in Virginia. These are the kind of investments the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act promised to make to our physical infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our broadband connectivity, and our electrical grid. And I'm excited that we can make long overdue improvements here in the Commonwealth, because they will make sure that Virginia remains the very best place in the country to raise a family, go to school, start a career, or begin a new business venture. It remains the greatest honor to serve Virginia's families, our communities, and our country. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve Virginia's 7th District. As Virginians contend with the challenges ahead of us, it is my job to keep an open line of communication, such as tonight's event. I look forward to answering your questions. I look forward to hearing your concerns, and I look forward to following up on any constituent service issues that might arise tonight. So with that, I want to thank you again for joining us this evening, and I look forward to the discussion.
All right, thank you very much, Congresswoman. We're going to get things started now with Rory, and Rory is calling from Orange. She's got a question about the Federal Excise Tax. Rory, you're online with the Congresswoman. What is your question?
Well, hi, Congresswoman. We have spoken before, and I appreciate your follow-up on a number of items. Always committed by these conversations to follow through in the citizenry. Much appreciated. 3 things I'd like to possibly ask. Well, I am going to ask. Number one, where are we on the potential of abating for a period of time the federal excise tax on fuel? That's number one. It started, the administration talked about it, others did. I see no progress. Number two, I see that there are expiring tax credits for a number of the car companies that are getting a credit for the production of electronic and other green type of vehicles. And that's going to add into the price tag if those credits by the federal government are not extended. And number 3, so the excise tax, the credits for the automobile manufacturers to be expanded. And number 3, and to your credit, as you mentioned in your last call, and if you could comment on what you are doing for the education and being able to train more trucking from Virginia, but also with the office that I have out west. I recently was in Long Beach, California. And when you look at the port of LA, Long Beach, San Pedro, where the president had visited last year and thought that 24/7 was going to open up the lines, there's certainly so many facets of that that have not happened. You and I have spoken about a supply chain czar, maybe somebody from the military that even for optics looks good. But I would encourage you and others on the phone that the Wall Street Journal has about a 15-minute video that goes into much detail on the supply chain activities from the ports and all the other variables that come into play. So the excise tax, the tax credits, and then our quest for this czar to go deeper into the supply chain. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your thoughtful questions, don't worry. I have a pen. I was tracking them portion by portion as well.
Okay.
So number one, talking about the gas tax and whether there might be a possibility of abating the gas tax for relief for drivers. First, I want to join with constituents who have called in, people across our communities who are impacted by the not just high cost of fuel, but in fact also the volatile cost of fuel. We saw some hopeful trends, and then those leveled off. We saw it creep back up, and so it is such a challenge. And certainly representing a district where so many people drive to work, long commutes, and particularly within the rural communities that I represent, I have spoken with county leadership about the on average miles that so many constituents drive each day back and forth to work. And it's significant, and the cost to people's pocketbook has been real. So there has been discussion, certainly at the state level, there's been much debate about what to do with the federal gas tax and with the state gas tax and whether there would be a temporary pause. That's a state issue, but at the federal level, there's been discussion of this as well. It's still um, possible that there may be a forward effort here, but indeed, what people like me are pushing for is a larger package that's focused on supply chain issues, inflation, across the board related legislation, and whether ultimately it does make sense or doesn't make sense to include a federal gas tax holiday, as some people call it, would be dependent upon the other steps that we would take. I think it would be short-sighted to simply stop that revenue coming in without also taking additional steps to really strengthen our supply chains moving forward. So I'm going to get to question number 3 and then go back because it's related to question number 1. So among the other things that I'm pushing for us to contend with inflation, right? And just as level setting, inflation wasn't caused by any one single thing. It wasn't caused in a day. We have inflation in this country because of a whole supply chain issues from a year ago because of COVID. At the ports, as you mentioned in your question, we have had backup of containers not being offloaded, not being shipped outbound. That's created real impact for American producers of products that are supposed to be shipped out of the country. So a couple things. One, I have been very vocal in calling on the administration to appoint a supply chain czar. They still haven't done it. I still think it's a good idea. I'm glad you agree with me. And I continue to push for this. It's important to have a single point of contact who is doing the kind of across the board view of what's happening in DOT, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, Small Business Administration, right? Everybody's got a little bit of a purview in this. And it would be important to have someone whose daily job is it to look at all of the cross-cutting challenges. So I still continue to advocate for that. In addition, I have worked not only with what was in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in terms of provisions to recruit and retain additional truck drivers. I've spoken about that on town halls in the past, but I also just introduced a piece of legislation, bipartisan, with a colleague, Republican colleague from Wisconsin, that is meant to recruit and retain additional truck drivers. We currently have a shortage of about 80,000 truck drivers nationwide. And just yesterday, I actually went for a ride with one of the local trucking companies here, went for a ride with one of the drivers, heard a lot about her experiences, what it is moving goods up and down the East Coast, being an important piece of moving goods from place to place as part of our supply chain. I actually got to do a loop in the truck around a parking lot. And so I have tremendous respect for anyone who can drive a truck more than the about 200 feet that I drove it. And my gratitude is with every truck driver who is on our roads keeping goods moving. But this bill would extend a refundable tax credit for anyone in a certified truck driving apprenticeship or training program, so on their way to getting their CDL. And then it would also, for 2 years, refundable tax credit. It would also provide a refundable tax credit to any certified driver, licensed driver, who is driving more than 1,900 hours a year. So making sure that, as they're ensuring the vital movement of goods across our country, that they also not only see an economic benefit to remain in the industry, but also recognize that we are valuing so significantly the importance of what they do for our supply chain. This bill is broadly supported by trucking organizations, both at the state level and at the national level. It's a bill that I discussed at great length with a number of different trucking companies in our district. I'm proud of this effort. And again, it's part of a larger piece of it. I'll speak about supply chain issues related and inflation related to meat and poultry. Certainly, we know that meat and poultry and the price increase that we've seen in meat and poultry has certainly outpaced the inflation that we've seen kind of across the board on average, and that impacts families at the grocery store. So I have 2 different pieces of legislation, one to contend with the monopolistic behavior of our 4 top processing plants. That is aimed at focusing on ensuring that under USDA, there's a special investigator division that would ensure that the Packers and Stockyards Act is being enforced, and that we are safeguarding not only our smaller meat producers, but we are rooting out anti-competitive behavior that drives up prices that so impact not only our meat producers, but also those of us who are going to the grocery store and purchasing meat. So those are two elements, two priority issues. I also have another bill that would help smaller processors, local processors, which would be so valuable throughout Virginia, get set up and be able to process meat, so butcher meat from our local cattle and poultry producers here in Virginia. So those are a couple of the elements of work that I am doing to get at some of the moving pieces related to the inflation that we're seeing. The third piece was about expiring tax credits and for those who purchase electric vehicles. So these tax credits are done based on make and model, and so there's a set number for each make and model. And when those expire, for a customer who wants to, or a person who wants to make use of those tax credit, they still have many options for newer models coming down the line. But some of the electric vehicles that have been on the market for quite some time, those numbers, those tax rebates are no longer available. But there are many tax rebates available for newer models and companies that are newer to this market. So there's no efforts right now to kind of retroactively provide those rebates for cars that have already had an expiration of those, but there are plenty of vehicles, electric vehicles, that are still eligible for those because they're newer to the market.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we're going to go to Carrie from Henrico, and Carrie has a question about the border crisis. Carrie, you're on the line with Congresswoman Spanberger. What is your question?
Hello, Congresswoman. I really appreciate all the effort you're doing up in D.C. for us. I am really concerned. This is obviously a much more broad issue. I've been hearing about how the immigration system has been, is at a breaking point, especially in Texas, and the morale of the Border Patrol is really at the lowest it's been. The amount of, undocumented immigrants is at record highs, and it's not stopping. We're coming into an era where there's going to be more and more people coming across because of the warmer season. What is being done? I mean, Biden's been in office for over a year, and I'm shocked, frankly, that nothing else has been done. I'd love to know what you can do.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start with a couple different comments to address the things you said. And I think you actually laid it out very, very well. Generally speaking, some of the concerns that you brought up, but certainly concerns that are echoed by so many constituents, and concerns that I share. You mentioned that Border Patrol agents are facing real significant issues related to morale. And that is true. There have been significant challenges along our borders for years. The reality is that our system needs major overhauls and improvements. We are an extraordinary nation, and people from all over the world dream of coming to the United States of America. And we need an immigration system that works. We need an immigration system that does not put the burden of its brokenness on the men and women who swore an oath to protect our country and our borders and enforce our laws. And we need an immigration system that does not put the burden of how broken it is on the family fleeing violence that has a legal right to file for asylum. And so a couple things in terms of what I have done. Under the last Congress, worked on legislation, got legislation passed, bipartisan legislation I worked on with a former member of the House of Representatives from Texas, focused on border security, focused on ensuring the utilization of intelligence to understand human trafficking and narco trafficking efforts, to better inform the men and women enforcing the laws at our border and to keep them safe and immigrants fleeing violence safe. That bill was signed into law by President Trump under the last administration, and I am proud of that. You are right to mention that there's anticipated increases in migration. Frankly, there's two contributing factors there. One, there is a seasonality to this. It's in fact based on needs here economically. People come to the United States for jobs, and the seasonality of jobs are heavily available in the warmer months. Also, there's the potential that there may be a lifting of Title 42, which was a public health provision put in place under the Trump administration and carried forward by the Biden administration that puts certain limitations on how people can enter the country, whether they can file for asylum, and based on a public health protocol. Now, from a public health standpoint, this will be lifted at some point in the future. And I have been very clear with the administration, writing a letter with a fellow former CIA officer, Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan, outlining the fact that there are real concerns related to how ready we are or are not at the time that this public health mandate is lifted. We laid out very specific requests of the administration to include that there be processing of families and individuals wishing to come to the United States, either at their country of origin or at a third party country. Sometimes those fleeing violence may not be able to safely walk into a United States embassy or consulate in their home country. But when they set out to make a 1,000-mile journey, giving them the ability to do it in a third-party country is a safe alternative, and one that also ensures that people with a legal claim to asylum are able to make that claim without making that dangerous journey and without overburdening the men and women of our border patrol. Overall, we need comprehensive immigration reform. It's something that I have long been a supporter of. The system needs reforms, and we need earnest conversations about the fact that throughout our district, we have a need for workers, for laborers, for additional visas. Notably, the Biden administration has expanded the number of H-2A visas, which was news that was met with quite a bit of joy from so many employers, particularly those that work in seasonal work, tourism. Well, H-2A is specifically within agriculture, but we need to go beyond that. We need to ensure that the process by which people who come to the United States to work, particularly in the agricultural sector, that the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which is a bill that I supported, co-sponsored, and voted for, is able to move forward. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation that ensures that we, the United States of America, we know who's coming into the country. We're making sure that we are getting visas for the agriculture sector, that farmers and producers that want to hire people from abroad have the ability to do that, that individuals coming to the United States go through the E-Verify system so that we can, be sure we know who's entering, but that we can also ensure the workforce is available and that people who want to work, earn money, contribute to our communities and our economy, and then travel back home and come back again, that they're able to do it legally and safely. And for many, year after year, if they so choose. I also have been a supporter of and have voted for the bipartisan Dream and Promise Act, which would give legal stability through legislation for any person who's characterized as a dreamer. So that's a child who was brought to the United States, a child who grew up here, whose life and entirety of their life has been here, and are now young adults, doctors and teachers and lawyers and police officers and community members throughout our society. And so, Carrie, I thank you for this question, because there's the immediacy of contending with the challenges at the border, which requires a significant plan. I was pleased to see that Homeland Security Secretary, the Homeland Security Secretary has released a plan that is a step in the right direction, but there's still many more questions that my colleagues on the Committee on Homeland Security have as we move forward, certainly into the summer. But importantly, as we look at the fact that presidency after presidency, and we can go back multiple presidents, the system has needed repair. The system has needed people of good faith to come together and say, I don't want to just attack opponents and cause fear. I want to solve a problem. I want to recognize and honor that throughout the history of our country, people have wanted to come here, and we should create the parameters for people to be able to do it legally, for us to get the workforce that our nation needs, and for us to have the safety and security and peace of mind of knowing who is coming to our country to work, to live, to vacation. And that's an important element. But we need people of good faith who are committed to real immigration reform from top to bottom and focused on actually solving once and for all a real challenge, a real crisis that far too often we are too reactive of. So I legislate on this. I'm focused on this. And I do hope that we can make long-term impact so that we are not reacting year after year when we continue to see the challenges that we see. Thank you for the question, Carrie.
As a reminder, this forum is interactive, and we'd love to hear your questions. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your keypad at any time to get in the queue to ask a question. A member of Congresswoman Spanberger's staff will collect your questions. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal below our online streaming player at spanberger.house.gov. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. If you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and wish to ask Congresswoman Spanberger a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. Now back to the phones, we're going to go to Kristen in Richmond. Kristen has a question for the Congresswoman about Roe versus Wade. Kristen, you're online. What is your question?
Thank you so much. First, I wanted to say I think you do just a fantastic job and really appreciate the way that you represent us and the way you handle yourself. I feel you're a real leader, so thank you for that. My question is, I have two. One is around, is there, I was cut off a little bit in hearing your introduction around Roe v. Wade because I was giving my name to the person, but is there any chance that Clarence Thomas might be investigated for conflict of interest, or is there any kind of effort around what's clearly the politicalization of the Supreme Court, and what can we possibly do to potentially keep this from happening? And my second question is around Ukraine. It's just, I think the entire nation has been sickened by the genocide going on over there. Is there, I think you have special insight on this with your service, and thank you for that service. Is there anything that might bring us into that conflict to help save Ukraine? It's just heartbreaking to see what all has happened over there. And I just wondered, is there any chance that we might, clear the skies or do other things that might help them more than just giving supplies to a dwindling number of soldiers?
Thank you for the questions, Kristen. So to speak to the first one related to the politicization of the Supreme Court, our country was founded on the principles that we have 3 separate branches of government. And whenever I meet younger students, kids, I always like to ask them, what are the 3 branches of government? Which one am I in? Just to reiterate the importance of those 3 separate branches. And it is rather distressing and disturbing that we continue to see the court move in certain ways that seem outwardly political. You mentioned Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas, and certainly the leaked audio related, the leaked text messages related to his wife in her advocacy as it relates to the January 6th insurrection is deeply, deeply concerning. At this point in time, the January 6th committee, the select committee in Congress, is doing the strong and detailed work of fully investigating what happened, what contributed to it, who played a part, and will make so much of their findings public when they do public hearings this summer. So I would point to what comes from that for kind of any possible future better understanding of certain individuals' involvement, in this particular case, the spouse of a Supreme Court justice. And also, I would defer to the Justice Department on any criminal-related investigations. Certainly, it's incumbent upon any member of the judiciary to recognize his or her own conflicts and act accordingly. And certainly, I would hope that Justice Thomas would do that if and when such a circumstance presents itself. Related to Ukraine and the genocide, the mass killing of Ukrainian civilians, the outrageous invasion, an all-out war that Russia has waged against not just Ukrainian soldiers, but the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian history, Ukrainian antiquities and buildings of note, an effort to just wipe Ukraine and its culture from the earth, has been a very clearly disturbing thing to witness. And so I just want to speak to what it is that the United States has done, what Congress has done, and the impact that that has had. So certainly from day one, the United States has led our partners and allies in the implementation of crushing sanctions. It is incredibly important, and I am very proud that the State Department and that the administration led our partners throughout Europe, throughout the world, in walking in unison in putting sanctions in place. This was such an incredible signal. It was also has been economically crushing for the Russians. This is important. In addition to that, we have provided military weapons, military supplies. We have provided supplies to backfill supplies from other countries. So working together to make sure that S-300s can go into Ukraine and then U.S. weaponry backfills it into Slovakia. We have led the way in our efforts to ensure that the Ukrainians have the military supplies that they need. In addition to military supplies, lethal supplies, we're talking, the S-300s, the Stingers, the Javelins, the Switchblade drones, which the Ukrainians have been particularly lethal in using, in addition to Turkish-made drones. We're also talking about communications support, the actual equipment to ensure they can communicate, medical supplies so that those who may be wounded can survive those battlefield wounds, and intelligence. Since day one, the United States intelligence community has done incredible work, and the administration has leveraged, and I say this as a former intel officer, has leveraged the intelligence that they've collected to make sure that Vladimir Putin knew that not only were we fully aware of his plans and intentions at his efforts to try and manipulate the world. You may think back to 2 months ago when there was the United States made public that Putin intended to release a false flag video that would be his justification for the invasion of Ukraine. Being able to get ahead of that was and continues to be an important advantage for the Ukrainians as they work on the battlefield. We just passed in the United States House a bill that would not only enable us to sanction, right? We're already sanctioning Russia and Russian oligarchs, but to seize what we sanction. So it isn't just about sanctioning money in a bank account or a house that, in the United States or elsewhere, or an oligarch's yacht. It's about going one step further, seizing it, liquidating those funds, and using those funds to further arm and support the Ukrainians and ultimately rebuild Ukraine when they have defeated the Russians. This is an important step, one that I'm proud to have worked to spearhead with some of my colleagues on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and also an important demonstration of our commitment to not only the sanctions, but to the ultimate defeat of Russia in this war. We've also passed in the House and in the Senate, so it's headed to the president's desk, a lend-lease legislation that would facilitate with greater ease additional provision of military weaponry and lethal aid to the Ukrainians. And so I was on a call with President Zelensky some weeks back when he talked about the need to close the sky. And I mentioned this, Kristen, because you mentioned it. And the issue with a no-fly zone is this, that if there is a no-fly zone established by the United States or by a NATO partner, someone must enforce that no-fly zone, which means when there is a plane in the air, someone must shoot it down. Shooting down a plane, that is the act of aggression that draws NATO into a military engagement and draws us into essentially a world war. And so the United States has done incredibly important things. I'm very proud as an American. I'm very proud of every vote that I have taken to support the Ukrainian people and to make clear that Vladimir Putin, his regime, and every single oligarch who enables it should be squeezed economically until until this war is over, until the Ukrainians win, and until it is clear that the authoritarian efforts, the violence of this regime is something that is denounced the world over, and something we will not tolerate. I was also proud to vote. Now, ultimately, the United States is a net exporter of oil and gas, but I was also proud to vote to say that we would not bring an import in any Russian gas. It was a small percentage, but it's a lot more than symbolic because it started a trend and made sure that other nations knew that they too could walk away from funding this sort of horrific genocidal war that the Russians are waging. So the United States continues to be a close partner. I'm sure that you've seen that Secretary of State Blinken and the Secretary of Defense Austin traveled to Kyiv, met with President Zelensky, the Speaker of the House, the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, among some others, traveled to Kyiv also to meet Zelensky and to demonstrate the United States' ongoing, consistent, and heartfelt commitment. And one final note on this, I have the absolute privilege of representing some incredible Ukrainian Americans in Virginia's 7th District whose hearts are breaking on a very personal level because of family, loved ones, and people they grew up with back home who are impacted, devastated, or killed by this war. And in that sadness and fatigue and horror, they have doubled down in their support, their humanitarian work. And so I just, on behalf of everyone I represent, I just want to thank those who continued to raise money and support and help people in Ukraine, particularly in light of their own fears and sadness about family members who are on the ground suffering.
All right, thank you, Congresswoman. Next up, we have Yvonne from Nottoway County. And Yvonne's got a question about high schools and community colleges. Yvonne, you're on live.
Yes, I'm here. Hello, Congresswoman Spanberger.
Hello.
How are you? Good.
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Good to hear you. We thank you for your service. You are just absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, ma'am. I was just in Nottoway two weeks back or so. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Having been an educator for a number of years, I'm always concerned with the welfare of students. And I want to know, has there been a discussion, or if there will be a discussion again, about high school graduates being at maybe the states or the government expense to go to a community college or a technical institute, anyway, something beyond high school? Where are we with that?
So I'm just going to ask one follow-up question because your phone blipped for just a moment. Were you talking about like some of the initial proposals about community college and additional skills training, federal support to that? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So I thank you for the question. Thank you for your work as an educator, and certainly to any educator on the line, thank you so much for your commitment to the next generation, and your commitment to educating the future of our communities, our Commonwealth, and our country. So I would want to mention two things. One, um, I voted, and I was proud to see it move forward, increase dollar amounts to Pell Grants, which is an important way that for some families who are Pell eligible, being able to utilize those funds to pay for community college, 2-year college, 4-year college is incredibly important. I also continue to support expanded use of Pell Grants beyond just 2-year and 4-year colleges to technical training programs that require certification, that require a learned skill set, but may not be a full degree program. So that's one bucket, and that's Pell Grant programs are typically need-based based on family income. Another effort that I've worked on relates to 529 plans. So those are the programs that allow people to save for college without with great tax relief. And so I lead an effort to ensure that not only are those 529s eligible for 4-year degree, 2-year degree, but that they can also be utilized for shorter term certification programs like truck driving licensures, and particular programs which right now, if they are shorter in length, if they don't meet certain hourly requirements for federal regulation, they are not yet eligible. So those are two places where I have been an advocate of making sure that students have whatever options appropriate for them. It may be a 2-year degree, it may be a 4-year degree, or it may be training in a skill set and in a profession that will allow them to be so focused on being a strong part of our economy, but not all of those jobs and skills require a longer degree program. So those are two places where I'm working from a congressional standpoint, where there has been some movement, and there continue to be other conversations about larger programs specific to community colleges. But to answer your question, those are the kind of two active elements and ones that I happen to be working on.
All right, thank you. As a quick reminder, this forum is interactive, and we would love to hear your questions. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your keypad at any time to get into the queue to ask a question. A member of Congresswoman Spanberger's staff will collect your question. You can also ask a question by submitting one to the portal below our online streaming player at spanberger.house.gov. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. And if you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and wish to ask Congresswoman Spanberger a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. And next up, we are going to ask a question about Medicare. And the question is, this is an online question, is there any chance of Congress passing a law to allow Medicare to negotiate the price of prescription drugs? This comes from Ron.
Ron, thank you for this question. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about a topic that I love to talk about, which is the fact that Medicare is currently prohibited from negotiating the cost of its prescription drugs. And that means that retirees throughout the country are impacted by the fact that Medicare cannot negotiate, legally prohibited by law from negotiating the cost of prescription drugs. And so there have been multiple efforts. I have co-led efforts. I have voted for efforts. In the House, I have voted multiple times to allow Medicare to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs. I have voted for legislation that would not only allow Medicare to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs, but would allow private insurers to utilize and leverage those negotiated prices. This would impact families across the country. This would impact people whether they're paying for medication every single month due to a chronic illness, or whether or not from time to time they get a prescription and they are shocked at the prescription counter when they go to pick it up. Certainly, I am passionate about this issue because it's an issue that I hear about non-stop. No matter where I am, I hear about the cost of prescription drugs, the impact that it has on seniors on fixed incomes, because Medicare is not able to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs, the impact that it has on families, the impact that it has on people who are literally making choices about when they pick up their prescription because they can't necessarily afford their rent or their mortgage or their grocery bill at the same time that they're picking up the medication that they need to survive. This has been a priority of mine since the day I got to Congress, and it will be a priority of mine for as long as I am in Congress. This is why a couple months back, I brought the president to our district because I wanted to make sure that he heard directly from people I represent, not from me, but from people I represent, about the impact that they feel because of the cost of prescription drugs and what it would mean for them if Medicare could negotiate the cost of prescription drugs. I was grateful that he came to the district, and I was certainly even more grateful to every constituent who felt it their responsibility and their honor to be able to tell their story on behalf of others about what it means to not be able to pick up the insulin that your child needs, that your husband needs at the same time because you're worried about whether or not you can afford it all. What it means when your wife in your golden years has an illness where the medication that she needs to stay alive is expensive, and every single month you are thinking about what that means for your ability, not just her ability to live, but your ability for your family to exist, to pay for food and housing and all of the other necessities of life. And so I'm grateful to every constituent who shared their story with him. I continue to advocate for this. I continue to vote. I continue to sponsor legislation. And I will keep on this until we see movement in both the House and the Senate and send a bill to the president's desk. But thank you for raising this issue, Ron. It's one that I am very passionate about because it matters to people. And when we're talking about the issues of gas prices and inflation and challenges that families are facing, particularly as we are on our way back towards recovery after COVID, one of the greatest impacts on American families is the cost of prescription drugs, and particularly for those who have chronic illnesses or life-threatening illnesses, where that medication means the difference of whether their tomorrow exists or not. So thank you for raising this issue. It's one that I continue to be passionate about. It's one that I continue to hear about from constituents. And if you want to share your story, please call our office. Please, 804-401-4110. I welcome your stories because they are what keep me fueled and working on this issue. Thank you so much.
All right, let's go back to the phones now. We have James from Orange, and James has a question about charging stations for electric cars. James, you're on live. What is your question?
Hi, Ms. Spanberger. I appreciate you taking the call. As a rural person in Virginia, driving is really something that we're required to do every single day to go to jobs, to go almost anywhere. And so when I look at the impact on gasoline, going all the way back to OPEC, Hurricane Katrina, the Gulf Wars, and looking at what's going on in Europe with Ukraine, it becomes very, very clear to me that our reliance on gasoline and oil at this point, almost to the detriment of everything else, is causing us a lot of problems, throwing us into large economic gaps. And so my wife and I recently were looking at potentially trying to see if we could, afford to get an electric car. And one of the challenges that I see is that in rural areas, there are almost no charging stations, and that leaves you with having put a charging port in your home. So I was curious, are there any federal incentives or any initiatives moving forward to try to support really getting stations out to the rural areas so that people have the opportunity to start making that move if it's something that they think is worth going toward? Quick second question, if you don't mind, regarding the Roe versus Wade initiative. I remember that in 1999, we had a president that was brought before Congress for impeachment trials because he lied before Congress. And I'm looking at what happened with the Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh sessions in 2017 and 2018. And in both cases, both of these people stated that they considered precedent to be a matter of stated and stable law in the Supreme Court. And while I don't like the fact that somebody broke the secrecy in this Supreme Court justice thing, I also have to say, if this is the motion that goes forward, should they not also be held for impeachment because their whole appointments were based on the fact that a number of people believe that they would actually support precedent? Thank you.
Well, thank you for these two different questions, and I'll address the second one first, and then I'll go to the electrification, electric vehicle issues. Certainly, I would urge anyone on the call who might be curious about the scope of James's question to look at some of the montages and the videos that are available, and certainly they've been played on the news and they're available, where it replays the questioning that some of our Supreme Court justices went through when they were before the United States Senate, where they stated very clearly an opinion that Roe versus Wade was settled law, that it was an issue of precedent, that stare decisis meant it couldn't be changed, and went on in quite a great amount of detail about that. I think that's the crux of James's question. So for anyone who's kind of following along and trying to determine what they think of this current reality, I would recommend you watch that and make a decision for yourself. Certainly, there have been multiple senators who, both from the hearings that they participated in or witnessed as members of the United States Senate, in addition to private conversations, there are senators who are speaking openly about the fact that that what was discussed with them, that what was part of the confirmation hearings, what was represented to them was not, in fact, from their opinion, truth. So I'll defer to those senators to continue discussing that. But certainly, I think that James raises some important questions about one's truthfulness when they are under oath, attesting to their opinions, their beliefs, and how they intend to do their job. Certainly, confirmation hearings of Supreme Court justices are paramount to the choices that senators make as to whether or not they're confirmed, as are the confirmation hearings of others who are serving in high-level positions in the executive branch as ambassadors, as secretaries or deputy secretaries, anyone who goes through that confirmation process, who's sworn in under oath. The purpose is that as they are being vetted and questioned, that they would be truthful about how it is they intend to execute on the job that that ultimately they may or may not be confirmed for. So I think James raises some really important questions there. And I'll be continuing certainly to listen to the senators who are speaking openly about the conversations that they had, the impressions that they had, and what was represented to them, both through those hearings and in private meetings. So pivoting over to the question about electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging stations, there's two things that I would point you to, James. One, in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there were significant investments made in electric vehicle charging station infrastructure. And in your question, you mentioned the instability that exists in the world. You had mentioned the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And frankly, we have a real need in the United States to ensure that we are not dependent on petroleum state autocrats and autocracies throughout the world, be it Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Iran, the countries that do source so much oil throughout the world are countries that, frankly, the United States, within our national security priorities, should be working to ensure that we are fully able to be independent and distanced from any of the bad actors who are among those petrostate autocracies that are out of sync with certainly with our country on so many levels. But where we can demonstrate leadership as a country is in the national security driven pursuit of energy independence. And we do that with our at-home production. Certainly, we are ultimately a net producer of oil and gas, but we do that by also harnessing the power of renewable energy and by utilizing electric vehicles, which are a great option for so many families. And so in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there were major investments in creating a network and supporting the creation of a network of electric vehicle charging stations. And I would note that this is different from a gas station, right? So a gas station, you want to put a gas station in the ground, you build the gas station, you dig a hole, you put the tank in, you can fill it up. Of course, there's permitting and there's building issues and construction, et cetera. But you can be a standalone entity. The issues with electric vehicle charging stations is that you are pulling electricity from the grid. So that impact has an impact on the electrical grid around where those charging stations may be. So there's a real value and importance in this involvement from Department of Transportation, from the federal government, in supporting the development and growth of electric vehicle charging stations. And so there's significant investments meant to ensure a strong network across the country, certainly on large traveled routes and also within our rural communities. But then I would point to a particular program, the Rural Electrification for America program. I call it REAP most of the time, so I hope I got the acronym right, which this is a program that is a federal program to bring renewable energy to rural communities. And I am leading an effort to ensure that this program can be utilized for electric vehicle charging station installations, because for so many people within our rural communities who, as you mentioned, Jim, frequently do have very long commutes if they're not working on the farm or they're not working in the local community, to be able to ensure, if they choose to drive an electric vehicle, to know that they have that charging mechanism either at their home or in their community is important. Also, as more and more individuals, regardless of where they live, do move to electric vehicles, it's important from a tourism standpoint. It's important from a travel standpoint, so that people may travel to beautiful rural Virginia and certainly Orange and other places in our district are major tourist destinations. And so to be able to ensure that that economic driver continues to be such and can accommodate both those who live in the county and might choose to drive an electric vehicle, but also can be helpful to ensuring that tourists can come and visit our beautiful countryside, charge up their vehicles, and then go home is an important part of this. So the REAP program is a beneficial program. It's valuable to farmers and producers and rural communities and economies, and ensuring that the rural electrification also allows for the program dollars also allows for use in electric vehicle charging station infrastructure is a modification to the program that I'm leading legislatively. So in process, James, that's the bottom line related to your questions, in process to try and make sure that we're bringing this infrastructure to the whole country. But I am working on it, and I thank you for raising it. I've heard about it from constituents, which is why it's something that I'm working on. So I'm glad to have additional feedback from you on this issue.
All right, thank you. That's going to bring us to the end of our call-in segment of the town hall this evening, and we are coming to the end of the live event. But before we go, we're going to turn the floor back over to Congresswoman Spanberger for some final thoughts. Congresswoman.
I want to thank you for being with us tonight. I want to thank those who called in with questions. I want to also remind, while we didn't have any questions tonight from someone who might have a constituent service related concern, I do want to remind everyone on the call that if you're having any challenges with a federal agency, IRS, the VA, Social Security, Small Business Administration, that my team, my office, we stand ready to assist you. So I welcome anyone to give us a call, 804-401-4110. I also want to let you all know, if you're not aware, every week we send out a weekly update providing details of everything that's happening legislatively on Capitol Hill, our work at home in the district, and we provide resources that may be useful. So I would urge you all to sign up for our newsletter at spanberger.house.gov. And I want to thank you for the discussion this evening. Certainly, we covered a wide array of issues, from inflation, gas prices, border and immigration issues, the war against the Ukrainian people, the challenges that we're facing with the draft ruling related to Roe versus Wade, and and the future of our economy and our country in terms of how we're educating students and what options exist for kids who want to explore options other than a four-year institution. So thank you to everyone who called in with questions. I really, truly appreciate it. It's an absolute honor to be your representative. And please, if you didn't want to call and speak publicly, I urge you to send us mail, give a call. We keep close track of the things that we hear about from constituents. It matters to me. And I really hope that you'll be in touch and highlight for us, good or bad, what might be on your mind and what you think we should know about. I continue to work on behalf of the people across our 10 counties. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve you. And I thank you very much for joining us this evening. Have a safe evening, a good evening. And I look forward to the next town hall. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. And thanks everyone for taking the time to join us for this important Virginia-focused telephone town hall with Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. We appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions. But if we were unable to get to your question this evening, you can call our direct office at 804-401-4110 during normal business hours or go to spanberger.house.gov. Thank you again. Stay safe and have a good evening.